It's Saturday morning, December 8th,
Yes.
and I am at Cobbs Creek with Joe Bausch of the Bausch Collection and chemistry professor, and Mike Serba, right there, you can't see it, of Mike Serba.
Yes, it is. Chief goal
We're going to play Cobbs Creek.
the restoration, as we've been working at this, has been really to recover the historic golf course that was here, and really it probably reached its zenith in 1928 when it hosted the United States Public Links Tournament. And that's the course we want to be available again for everyday play for folks who come out here. In working with Gil and Jim, though, one of the advantages we have is that there is a second golf course on the property. Today's Caricon golf course that was built in the late 20s and early 30s, kind of as an overflow golf course. That additional acreage, though, is on some really interesting land. And with Gil and Jim and their architect's eye, they were out here and said, boy, it'd be nice to be able to create something that could host a high-level competition in the area. And even though the original Cobbs golf course is a very fine, golf course for that, and in and of itself is a high challenge. If an event were to come to Philadelphia and be hosted at this venue, there's a lot of considerations that really are beyond the challenge of the golf course. Where do you put people? How do you flow traffic, etc.? So what they looked at was taking what today is the Caricon golf course and using some of that land as both a 9-hole golf course for kind of seniors, beginners, everyday play, condensing it from an 18-hole course today, but then making it configurable to be able to use some of that land for golf holes that would support a tournament-worthy golf course that used 14 holes of the old course here, as well as 4 holes on the newly configured Caricon course, into a really spacious course that I think we were looking at was coming in around 7,200 yards, par 70, and certainly opens up the property to allow the kind of things like gallery flow and all that could host a.
Is there any timetable that you can discuss at this point?
I know folks would like to get approvals before the U.S. Open at Marion in June of 2013. Certainly, I think the next phase of this is really to get.
Well, that's 6 months away,
right.
7 months away.
Right. I don't think that's unrealistic, given that the plan already exists. What will be the next phase of this will be the really getting this out to the public, getting it out to the city. A lot of the folks who are in decision-making areas in the city are already aware of this project on a high level. So I think the idea and what I've heard talked about was that construction could begin in 2013 with the opening in 2015.
And what considerations or obstacles are there between what's out here today and approval?
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question. Work along the creek needs to be done irrespective if anything is ever done with the golf course. And with the city's stormwater management plan, that is monies that are already approved at the EPA level. The idea that we came up with is really to look at this whole property globally, in the sense that if we could create enough economic benefits through the creation of additional wetlands that tend to be worth money to the city in terms of being able to trade off areas that are newly constructed, like addition to the runway at the airport, things that destroy wetlands could be mitigated by creating wetlands in other areas of the city. The idea overall is to create an environmental impact to this entire property that is net positive. Now, to do some of the things that are necessary for the golf course, some trees will be removed, some trees will be planted in other areas, but the overall goal is to have a net overall environmental impact that is positive and that's very viable and consistent with the City of Philadelphia's green energy plan and green waterway plan.
I don't think you've really talked much about how a large part of what interests the city in this whole project is it ties into their overall water plan that
Yes.
you've mentioned to me on the phone, but not in this tape.
Yes. Every city, every major city in the country has had to come up with a stormwater management plan. Most cities have gone the traditional route of building additional concrete holding tanks, culverts, other things. Philadelphia came up with something that was very revolutionary, and as such, being the round peg in the square hole, took additional time for the EPA to actually look at it, decide it was functionally valid, and approve it. They did approve it as of June of last year. This is a big component of that, the Cobbs Creek that runs through here. So I think there's a nice kismet in the fact that something had to be done to the creek anyway. So we decided to take a proactive view of that and say, well then, how do we preserve the golf course, do what's necessary for the creek, and overall improve the environment of this, as well as create a golf course that really honors the history and legacy of this place.
One thing you haven't really talked about on this is the impact for longtime, ordinary, regular golfers
Sure.
who love Cobbs Creek the way it is.
Right, and I think I'll say a couple things there. One is there's definitely from everyone involved the idea that people who've supported this golf course for years would and who are either city residents or neighboring suburbs, and I've heard them talk about certain zip codes and other things, would pay a local fee, which would be markedly reduced from what, say, someone coming from the further suburbs like myself would pay for the golf course. That it would be an attraction, though, so that somebody coming into the city of Philadelphia on business would want to come and play Cobbs Creek. Those folks would pay the premium rate for that.
Any idea what that would be?
I think we're talking about something consistent for a visiting player with what a high-end public golf course in the suburbs would be on a weekend. But I think you're talking about as well something under $50 with cart for someone who's a local player and who has supported the course for years. Again, I'm not into the business so much of it, but those are some of the numbers I've heard talked about.
One of the goals being that longtime regulars would not be priced out of playing at Cobbs Creek.
That's correct. That would be the worst of all things that could happen. I mean, I've always been a public course golfer. We want to support the public course golfers here. This is a public golf course. It will always remain that. And it can just be a much improved public golf course given the bones of what are here.
What's left to talk about that we haven't talked about so far?
Good question.
I don't think there's a whole lot left to talk about other than,
Community.
well, the community, yes. We have some ideas that would involve, the community sort of feeling a sense of ownership to the course, and I'm not really sure that exists very much at this time. And that's in real early stages, but we hope to be able to together maybe with something equivalent of the First Tee or a First Tee program that is really going to involve the community, involve some of the local kids here to where they can, whatever, you come into some center and you for every 3 hours of homework that you do, you get a half-hour lesson for free, something like that. There's been models out there and other courses.
Credit with, getting this thing off the ground.
Sure. Well, Chris Lang, who's very prominent amateur golfer, ended up getting a copy through kind of unusual circumstances. I guess he was playing golf with the president of Billy Casper Golf in Florida, and the topic of Cobbs Creek came up, and I guess Chris had played here years ago, and president of Billy Casper Golf mentioned that that some of us had put together a history of this golf course. Chris read it, and in his words, read it in a couple days and said, "We got to do this." Chris is well connected in the game and well respected in the game, so his involvement has really helped propel this thing from a real dream of people who are just public course golfers to something that could be a reality.
The guys you're talking about basically are the guys on Golf Club Atlas, for the most part.
Guys on Golf Club Atlas were the guys who started it with us in terms of looking at feasibility, but we looked at it from the very theoretical level of, could this be restored? It does enough for the original golf course still exist that it could be restored consistent with its historic routing, and once we found that out that it could be, between Joe's research, which was just stellar, and the amount of information he found about this place and how important this place was to the history of the game in Philadelphia, and me taking that and compiling it kind of chronological and writing a little bit of a narrative around it, and getting that into some hands of people like Chris Lang who were able to do something meaningful with it.
And anybody who wants to read that can read it
At the Friends of Cobbs Creek.
Right, or
URL.
they go to the blog for the Friends of Cobbs Creek, or they can read a very nice version online at Pete Trenham's Golf History webpage.
Pete Trenham's Golf History webpage,
Great.
which is linked to on my website,
Yes, you have a link to it
myphillygolf.com,
as well.
and also on the Friends of Cobbs Creek blog,
Correct.
which is, what's the exact address of that, do you know?
That address is run off of one of my servers at school. It's a long address, but anyone could simply put in Friends of Cobbs Creek into a Google search, and it will come out as one of the top hits.
Okay. I think we got